You never react. It's like I'm yelling into a wall. She wasn't angry when she said it. No heat behind the words. No frustration trying to be heard. Just a faint curl of her lip, like amusement hiding behind fake concern. I remember watching the way her fingers circled the rim of her wine glass. She didn't look at me when she said it. She looked through me, like a student reciting lines she'd rehearsed. Except she wasn't looking for a response. She was measuring the silence. I gave her nothing. Not because I was numb. Not because I didn't care. But because I had learned, through long nights and longer conversations where every sentence was a trap, that silence was the only safe option left. She had started twisting my calm into something sinister. If I stayed measured, I was cold. If I paused to think, I was detached. If I didn't fight back, I was emotionally absent. I wasn't avoiding her. I was trying not to burn the house down. That night, I sat back in my chair and let the pause stretch until it swallowed the room. She smirked like she'd won a round I hadn't played. You never even ask if I'm okay anymore, she added, softer this time, a whisper masquerading as vulnerability. I nodded. Just once. Not to agree, but to acknowledge receipt of the performance. Because that's what it was. A performance. And I had finally stopped confusing her lines with truth. But something in that moment shifted. She wasn't lashing out because she was hurt. She was testing whether I could still be provoked. Not to fix anything, but to prove to herself she still had control over the story. My silence was no longer passive to her, it was defiance, and she hated it. Later, as we climbed into bed on opposite sides, she reached for her phone without a word. The glow from the screen cast her face in sharp angles. She wasn't scrolling absent-mindedly. She was writing something. A message? A note? A rewritten scene where I was the villain and she, the exhausted heroine, trying her best? I stared at the ceiling while her nails clicked softly across glass. You never ask what I'm thinking, she said finally, not looking up. I turned toward the wall. Because I already know. She didn't reply. And for the first time, I realized that silence, mine, hers, ours, wasn't absence. It was preparation. It started with tone. Always the tone, she'd say. It's not what you said, it's how you said it. But the problem was, I hadn't said anything at all. At first, I thought she wanted connection. That maybe my restraint felt like distance, so I tried. I opened up, shared more, leaned into discomfort. But it never landed. My vulnerability didn't soothe her. It just gave her new language to twist. You're always so neutral, she'd say, exasperated, as if my composure were an insult. But then came the therapy terms, clipped phrases delivered with certainty, borrowed from podcasts or TikToks or half-read books. I heard them over and over like chants, always out of context, always in her favor. Your avoidance is harmful. You're emotionally neglectful. You don't make space for me to be seen. I wanted to argue, to ask when disagreement became cruelty, to ask how silence, my silence, had suddenly become an act of aggression. But I didn't. Because I saw what she was doing. She wasn't hurt. She was building a case. Each fight was another scene. Each quiet dinner or slow weekend became part of the narrative she was quietly constructing behind my back. And she was the weary heroine, misunderstood but brave, struggling against a partner too emotionally distant to love her properly. It wasn't until I heard her on the phone with her sister that the pattern clicked into place. She thought I was out of earshot in the garage. I wasn't. I don't know how to get through to him, she said. He's just gone. Gone. That word stuck in my throat for the rest of the week. Because I wasn't gone. I was standing in front of her every day, paying bills, cleaning the kitchen, picking her up when her car wouldn't start. I was present. I just wasn't performing. And she needed performance. The following weekend, she suggested we take temporary space to reset our connection. It's healthy, she said, with a smile too practiced to be casual. I nodded, not because I agreed, but because I was already watching the edges of the story she was writing for someone else. She wasn't asking for space. She was giving herself permission to leave, and narrate it like I vanished first. A few nights after this conversation, we attended a friend's birthday gathering. She insisted we go separately, said it would be good for us to arrive as individuals, practice autonomy. I let her have that. It was easier than challenging the logic, and I already knew this wasn't about independence. It was about optics. I arrived 20 minutes after her. The moment I stepped inside, I could feel it. Subtle, but dense. The shift in air when you enter a room where your name's already been said. Heads turned, but only briefly. A few nods. A few polite smiles. Nothing warm. She was at the center of a small group, glass in hand, eyes bright. Telling a story, clearly mid-sentence. He's the quiet type, she said with a laugh. Stoic or just gone. A pause. The people around her chuckled politely. Someone glanced my way. She didn't. She never even acknowledged I'd walked in. I stood for a while near the drink table, watching her in reflection. The ease in her gestures. The confidence in her performance. She wasn't just playing a part, she believed it. In her version, I was the absence. I was the void she bravely tried to fill. Later, a mutual friend, Melanie, pulled me aside. She didn't mean harm. She was trying to help in that unhelpful way people do. She told me she's got support lined up if things go south, Melanie said, voice low, eyes searching mine. Support, I repeated, not asking but confirming. She nodded. I sipped my drink and looked out over the balcony where she stood, laughing now with a hand on someone's arm. I wasn't confused anymore. She wasn't trying to mend anything. She was staging her exit like a soft breakup album. Quiet heartbreak, heroic effort. The woman who tried everything, except staying honest. When we left the party that night, we didn't speak on the drive home. She didn't ask why I was silent, didn't mention the story she told in front of our friends. She leaned against the window, scrolling through her phone, like the night was already archived. Back home, I lay awake in the dark and realized something small but final. She didn't want a resolution. She wanted a clean story, one where she could say she gave her all, and one where my silence, long mistaken for peace, could finally be recast as guilt. 3 days passed before the next shift arrived, this one delivered by someone completely unaware of its weight. I was in the kitchen, helping clear up after a dinner we hosted for her friends. She had insisted we keep up appearances. Just one more evening, she'd said, brushing a hand across my shoulder like we were still playing the same game. One of her friends, Naomi, lingered behind while the others chatted in the living room. She poured herself another glass of wine, then leaned against the counter beside me, smiling faintly. She said you'd never leave, Naomi said casually, not even looking up. That you're too soft to make moves. She laughed then. Not cruel, not sharp, just certain. Like someone recounting a joke they'd heard a few times before. Familiar, polished, rehearsed. She didn't notice the way I froze. My hand hovered just above the sink, sponge still dripping in my palm. Naomi didn't see the shift in my breathing, or the way her words cracked something that had been carefully balanced for weeks. She was just repeating something she assumed was harmless, but it confirmed what I had already started to suspect. She wasn't worried about losing me. She had already mentally left, weeks ago, maybe longer, and all that remained was the staging of her departure. She thought I was a placeholder, someone too still to act, too steady to be a threat. She mistook my silence for weakness, my calm for surrender. That night, I watched her closely across the dinner table, saw the small glances she exchanged with certain guests, the calculated softness in her voice when someone asked how we were doing. Oh, you know, she said, smiling without teeth. We're figuring things out. She was crafting the narrative brick by brick, not through lies but through tone, through performance, through selective omissions and well-timed phrases. And for the first time, I stopped trying to interrupt her version of the story. Because I realized I didn't need to argue anymore. I just needed to leave quietly enough that the story fell apart without me. The moment I decided to act, it was raining. Not dramatically, just that light, steady kind of rain that makes everything seem quieter. The kind of weather where people stay inside and don't notice what's slipping away. She had left early that morning for a weekend retreat with some of her friends. Or at least, that's what she said. I didn't ask for proof. I didn't need to. Her departure wasn't suspicious, it was routine. Everything had become routine. The way she gathered her things, kissed the air near my cheek, and said, "Don't wait up." I didn't. The silence after she left felt different this time. Not oppressive, liberating. I started with the lease. The apartment was in both our names, but I'd been the one paying. Always had, quietly, reliably. While she built her stories, I'd kept the lights on. The landlord liked me. He didn't ask questions when I filed the amendment, and paid the fee to remove her name. The locks were next. It took less than 2 hours. New deadbolts, new keys. Clean, quiet, no drama. I didn't post about it, didn't call a friend. I just made sure everything that mattered to me was protected. I rerouted my mail to a private P.O. box. Small, dull, effective. I called the credit card company, closed the joint account, and reopened one in my name only. The balance was low. I'd already been careful, another thing she hadn't noticed. By evening, I had cleaned the apartment, boxed her things neatly, and placed them in the hallway closet. I didn't throw anything out. I wasn't angry. I was prepared. The last thing I did was remove her access to the shared calendar. She'd always used it to keep track of mutual plans, dinners she arranged, events she claimed I forgot. I changed the permissions, left no notes. Then I turned off my phone. Not out of spite. Out of peace. Because that's what she never understood. My silence wasn't submission. It was strategy. She tried her key 3 times. Click, jiggle, pause, click again. I wasn't home. That was by design. I wanted her to meet silence, not resistance. She stood outside our door on a quiet Monday evening, jacket pulled close, phone in one hand, her old key in the other. I imagined she looked around the hallway, confused, maybe a little irritated. Not panicked, not yet. The lock didn't budge. She knocked, not loud, not urgent. Just a casual knock, the kind that says, "This must be a mistake." She tried calling me. Twice. Then stood with her phone to her ear, waiting for the version of me she used to control to pick up. I didn't. She sent a text. "Hey, I think the lock's jammed. Are you home?" I let it sit unread. Then came the second message. "Can you call me? This is weird." It was strange, I'm sure, for someone so certain of her grip to suddenly find the handle gone cold in her palm. She knocked again, this time harder. Not angry, not yet, just louder, as if the volume might restore the script. But the door stayed shut. Inside, everything was still. Her boxes were tucked neatly in the hallway closet, not thrown, not hidden, just relocated. Her name wasn't on the lease anymore. Her mail wouldn't come here. Her calendar entries were gone. She didn't know that yet, but she would. She stood outside a while longer, calling once more before finally walking away. The sound of her heels echoing down the hall was strangely final. She had rehearsed every version of the ending she could control. Tears, therapy terms, twisted logic. But she hadn't prepared for this. No confrontation. No dramatic goodbye. Just the soft, decisive sound of a lock that no longer fit. She told people I ghosted her. That was her first move. The quickest one. The one she thought would land the cleanest. But it didn't. The problem with rewriting history is that sometimes the audience has already seen too much of the truth. She told a few close friends, frantic texts at first, then longer messages, something about emotional abandonment, about how I just disappeared. But when they asked for clarity, she had none. Screenshots? None that made sense. Our conversations had been civil, sparse, neutral. There was no crescendo, no dramatic fight, no sign of unraveling. Just distance, and that wasn't enough. She tried to paint it as slow neglect, a man who checked out. But her tone was off. She was too polished, too rehearsed. A friend of mine, Jordan, said she tried to tell him I'd moved out without warning. He asked where I went. She didn't know. He asked why I left. She said, "He just couldn't handle emotional accountability." He told me that with a strange look in his eyes. Not judgment, something closer to suspicion. Like he'd expected me to lose it, and was unsettled that I hadn't. "What happened?" he finally asked. I just said. I listened. To what? To everything. To the words she used when she thought I wasn't paying attention. To the laughter she shared at my expense. To the way she shaped the world around her to pre-forgive her exit. She needed me to explode, or collapse, or fight for her approval. And when none of that happened, her version of events stopped making sense. People drifted. The ones she tried to rally stayed polite but detached. The group threads went quiet. The coffee invites dried up. She'd built the scaffolding of a clean break, but the building never fell. Because I wasn't missing. I was just done. There was a moment, about 2 weeks after the locks changed, when I caught myself staring at an empty chair across the room. Not out of longing, out of habit. I used to glance there mid-conversation, mid-thought, mid-meal, expecting some eye roll or sarcastic aside. A prompt. A cue. But now there was just space. And the realization that I no longer flinched when it stayed silent. That's when I knew I wasn't trying to get her back. I wasn't even angry anymore. I was clearing out her voice from my head, like peeling off old wallpaper, layers of passive judgment, of phrases crafted to cut without drawing attention. Are you even listening? You always turn things into a power dynamic. It's not that you're wrong, it's just how you are. I'd heard them so often they echoed even in the quiet, but now they were fading. She tried one more time to regain the upper hand. A voicemail this time, her voice soft, deliberate. I just want to talk, not to fight. Just to understand what happened. But that wasn't true. She didn't want clarity. She wanted closure on her terms. A conversation where I played the part of the broken one. Where I admitted I'd been cold, distant, impossible to love. Where she could walk away feeling justified. I didn't call back. Not because I didn't have words. Because I finally understood that sometimes silence isn't the absence of communication. It's the end of performance. She had been speaking to a version of me that no longer existed. The one who absorbed everything, reacted to nothing, and stayed present out of loyalty, not love. And now that version was gone. I still felt the weight of what I left behind, not her, but the version of myself that stayed too long trying to fix something that was designed to collapse. But that weight was growing lighter. Every day without her script in my ear was a day I remembered what it felt like to hear my own voice. Uninterrupted. She sent one last message the week after I cleared out her name from the last of the utilities. It came late at night, timestamped just past midnight. I keep thinking about everything. I wish we could have tried one more time. You just disappeared. Disappeared. That word again. But this time, it didn't land the same. There was no pull in my chest. No flicker of guilt. Just the quiet awareness that the story she kept trying to tell no longer had a reader. I didn't reply. Because I knew what would come next, the slow pivot from outreach to indictment. If I stayed silent, I was cold. If I responded, I was giving her a scene, a platform, a script revival. I denied her both. The truth was, I hadn't disappeared. I had been dissolving in front of her for months, fading under the pressure of being blamed for the very distance I'd tried to close. I'd shown up in every room, kept every quiet promise, held together a version of us she stopped believing in long before I did. She mistook my stillness for absence, but stillness is what kept us intact for as long as we were. She thought I didn't care because I didn't shout, because I didn't cry or beg or slam doors, but I stayed longer than I should have. I fought for peace when she only responded to noise, and when I finally left, I didn't ask her to understand, because I wasn't trying to be understood anymore. I was reclaiming space, not just physical, but mental, emotional, narrative. She tried to keep telling the story without me, but eventually she realized something fundamental. You can't perform a two-person play alone. She pressed for a reaction, a final word, a dramatic close. And all she got was silence. Not because I couldn't speak, but because the conversation was over. She just hadn't realized it yet. Her betrayal wasn't physical. It wasn't obvious. It didn't come with receipts or lipstick smudges or late-night calls from unfamiliar numbers. It came in slow turns of the knife, each one dull enough to go unnoticed at first, but they cut just the same. She built her betrayal with language, carefully chosen phrases, borrowed psychology terms, misused frameworks. She didn't raise her voice, she rewrote the meaning of mine. The core of it was this: she framed my silence as failure. Not indifference. Not self-regulation. Failure. Any time I chose not to escalate, she called it abandonment. Any time I paused to think, she said I was withholding. She turned my restraint into a claim that I was withholding. Made quiet into cruelty. But she knew exactly what she was doing. She didn't want resolution. She wanted control. And when she couldn't provoke me, she decided to replace me, first in the relationship, then in the story she told others. She spoke of disconnection, emotional absence, withdrawing without warning, all of it delivered with a tone of gentle martyrdom. The brave woman who tried. Except she wasn't trying to reach me. She was staging my absence so that, when she left, it would look like the natural result of a one-sided effort. The social betrayal followed. She quietly insulted me to people we both knew, calling me stoic, numb, checked out. Planted ideas, subtle things, just enough to make people doubt me if I ever told my version of the story. She made me into a ghost before I ever left. That was her real betrayal, not leaving, not even lying, but systematically removing me from the narrative, one quiet edit at a time. She didn't cut the cord. She made it look like I had wandered off into the fog, and she had no choice but to let go. Except now, she was the one standing on the other side, and there was no one left to perform for. I didn't find a message thread. There were no secret accounts or hidden plans stashed on her laptop. That would have been too clean. What I found instead was the pattern. It came in pauses, in the way she repeated the same phrases with increasing conviction, like someone practicing lines, not confessing truth. I began to recognize her tells, the sudden switch to therapeutic vocabulary when she needed leverage, the vague accusations whenever I was too quiet to argue. And then came Naomi. That moment in the kitchen, her wine glass half full and her smile careless. She said you'd never leave? That you're too soft to make moves. That was it. She didn't say it like gossip. She said it like fact, like something that had been said more than once, something repeated enough to become a shared understanding between them, and I knew. Everything I'd suspected, everything I had slowly pieced together in silence, was real. She thought she owned my stillness. She thought I was frozen in place, steady, predictable, unthreatening. Someone she could slowly dismantle in public without ever being called out. Because who listens to the quiet one? Who believes the man who doesn't fight? But what she didn't see, what none of them did, was that my silence wasn't fear. It was documentation. Every time she mocked me behind a smile, every time she delivered her lines to friends just loud enough for others to overhear, I was listening. Not for proof, for pattern. Because pattern is harder to deny. She didn't just prepare her exit, she rehearsed it. And Naomi's offhand comment was the final cue. Not for confrontation, but for resolution. Because when someone believes you won't move, the only real response is to leave so quietly that they don't realize it's over until the key no longer fits. She came back again, 2 weeks after the silence, mid-afternoon, dressed like she hadn't been caught in the rain but still looked unsettled. No umbrella. Just a small leather bag over one shoulder, too small for anything important, not enough for a return, just enough to pretend she hadn't noticed the end. She knocked, 3 short taps, then a pause, then 2 more. I didn't answer. She waited. I watched from the far end of the apartment, out of sight, barely breathing. Not to hide, but because I wanted to hear what absence sounded like to someone who never expected to feel it. Another knock, louder this time. Are you home? No reply. Her voice softened. Can we just talk? She pressed her ear to the doorframe. Nothing inside moved. No music. No voices. Just the stillness she once called neglect, now turned absolute. She stayed there for a long time, waiting for a scene that would never start. I saw her silhouette shift. She stepped back, looked at the lock as if it might explain itself, touched the handle again, gently, like maybe this time the key would work, like maybe this was all a mistake. It wasn't. This was what she had been asking for all along, without knowing what it cost. Space. Autonomy. Silence. Only now, it didn't feel like control. It felt like being locked out. She didn't cry. Didn't scream. Just stood there, one hand resting on the door, the other holding her phone, unsure if calling would change anything. It wouldn't. I didn't block her. I didn't erase her. I just stopped making myself available to the story she was trying to tell. Eventually, she walked away, and for the first time in months, I let myself feel the ache, not for her, but for the version of me who kept trying to be understood in a language she never wanted to learn. That version was gone now. What remained was quiet. But it was mine.